So, specifically in gender relationships and childhood, research has shown that the preference for same sex playmates is universal regardless of cultural norms prescribing gender segregated environments in childhood. In regards to the biological predisposition, boys do tend to engage in activities that are or facilitate physical activity and competition, and girls they tend to engage in play that emphasize more interaction and collaboration. However, ecological environments do make a slight difference in terms of um, the strength of the predisposition and in terms of other views on gender relationships in childhood. In terms of biological markers of sexual maturation in adolescence, we have heard before probably the term puberty, which is a period of biological transition between childhood and adulthood, lasting approximately 1 to 2 years. And biologically, this is marked in boys by a change in voice, uh, pubic and facial hair, muscle development, growth spurt, and a nocturnal ejaculation, and grows more specifically with menarche or the first menstruation. However, culturally, or when we take in consideration the ecological factors, um, the boy is granted or adult status when more specifically, as we talked before, depending on the culture, when the culture views that a boy can now be transitioned into adulthood. Times um, that period is marked by a transition or rite of passage ritual. And for girls, the first menstruation or menarche, research has shown that in locations where food sources are more limited, girls tend to experience menarche or the first menstruation later than those where food is more available. It means that the physical surroundings or location or environment does make a difference on when the first menstruation can occur. And for girls in some cultures, menarche or the first menstruation serves as a cultural marker to indicate readiness among women to get married, find a sexual partner. For example, among Hindus, a girl is considered to be sexually mature with the onset of menstruation. However, a sexually mature unmarried woman living with their parents is considered unfortunate for everyone involved, including the family. There's also variations of views on chastity. For example, in China, the only sexual behavior considered legal and morally permissible is heterosexual intercourse with a monogamous marriage. In traditional Hinduism, any unnatural sexual activity, including extramarital relations or homosexuality, results in losing one's caste, mutilation, and even death. And it is important to note that chastity norms rarely apply in the same way to young men compared to young women. Coming from the Latino culture, which values and expects machismo from young men, and on the other hand, they expect passivity from young women, and they expect them to follow chastity or to um, remain a virgin until they get married. As research from other countries has shown also, and for example, the Mexican culture, young men may be expected or maybe not expected, but at least people may be okay with young men um, having sexual relationships prior to getting married, but not women. If a woman has sexual relationships prior to getting married, she's almost shun away from her own community, and it is it is not well looked upon when a woman has relationships out before or outside of the marriage. But many times, parents are okay with young men having sexual relationships before getting married. And in regards to sexual minorities and culture, the textbook discusses that the cultural norms about what men and women should look like play a very significant role in terms of how sexual minorities are looked by their culture. For example, in the Latino culture, machismo in the culture, it's very difficult for someone to come out as gay or lesbian. It's a bit difficult for someone, for example, from the majority culture in the US, but because and for example, the Mexican or the culture in other Latin American countries is so rigid regarding issues of it is much harder for someone to be accepted and for someone understood and accepted by society regarding their sexual identity or gender identity. And research has shown that there is an increased number of participation of women in the workforce. However, that does not necessarily mean that there has been a significant change in gender roles. When both spouses are employed and working outside of the home, the child rearing and housework responsibilities are still the main responsibilities of the women. And what this is surprising is that we may think that this may be normal in developing countries, but there are similar patterns found in industrialized countries such as the US, Switzerland, and other industrialized countries. In terms of division of labor in the workforce, women and men are frequently segregated into different occupations in the labor force. One possible explanation is that perhaps occupations requiring female stereotypes attributes such as nurturance are female dominated because women have better skills for that work or they prefer that works. So some examples of these includes teachers, nurses, other types of caregivers. And similarly, occupations requiring physical endurance, strength, or assertiveness tend to be dominated by males. Problem is that female dominated occupations generally have a lower status than male dominated occupation, regardless of the work involved. In addition, high status occupations typically are better paid and are associated with access to greater resources, resulting in frequent wage and status gaps between some women and men. And the problem is that even in jobs where women could potentially do a good job, where they would have the qualifications, and still a very low number of women working in those type of occupations.